Hey y'all, it's been a while, but here's the promised 2.5 video. Before that, I'd like to mention I held a poll which I made a YouTube post about not long ago, and the results of said poll are also out, which I also made a post about, so check those out. Now, this video is massive, so let's not waste our time and get right to it. I'll be using the 5-point analysis I've discussed and referenced in the past. The incredible thing about this aspect is how there isn't a single bland character here. Let's go down the list one by one and look at how they are utilized in this patch. First, of course, is Liang Yue, the driving force of the narrative, the one we follow from the start to the end of the main event story. She is a vigilance cadet sent to the Los Angeles Department of Arcanum Affairs, aka the DAA, to complete her training and assist them in solving the Nightpiercer case. That is where we start the story, and the crux of it is really her character arc. Now, I want to touch on what I really like about Liang, which is that she is, I'd argue, the most real and complete character with an history and evolution across a period of time from a very young age all the way through till her conclusion. By the end of the story, we learn about many different aspects of her, from her love of movies to what the place she lived in was like, to her issues with Qiangling, Shangling, and plenty more. Sorry, I butchered that name. As for her character arc, it can best be summarized in her monologue voice line.
Thought that true justice is impartial. It follows reason, not bias. I thought I had steeled my heart, that I was able to be truly impartial. Now that I'm wavered, I've realized that no one can totally remove their bias. I'm glad that I learned this before it was too late.
There is also her link to the cinema aspect of the framing here as a fan of movies herself. Shi Xing is the antagonist of 2.5, but she's also the deuteragonist of the story. One might be inclined to think it's not, but no. Shi Xing is the second most important character in the story and a foil to her hero, Liang Yue. The gist of her background is this. She is the child of a criminal who grew up in poverty, all while retaining and acting on a strong sense of justice, even when it resulted in her getting into fights that costed her jobs, leading to her bouncing between jobs in poverty. It is this background that made her say,
Drop of ink falls onto paper. No matter how hard you wipe, it can never be spotless again. People say that every saint has a past and every sinner has a future. What garbage. Some mistakes can never be forgiven.
for how could she believe in the idea of forgiveness for sin, for criminals, when her own father, being one, is why she had to fend for herself in poverty? Why would she not believe in sin leaving an indelible mark when she herself had spent a significant amount of her life branded with the mark of being the child of a sinner? This is not spelled out for us explicitly that much, but nevertheless, it is the reality they present us with. After this phase of her life, she ends up picked up by Noir and Heijin for the role of Seo Sang, the latter of whom is as Shising says here.
It's gone. The person who cared for me more than anyone in the world. Dead.
Shising fully embraces and throws herself into the role. To her, playing the role was more important than even her own life. It was no delusion or nor a desire to pretend to be someone else. It was conscious and deliberate dedication of her entire being to playing the role of a hero, the one who brings about hope in true justice. For as she says, if we can't accept it in fiction, what hope do we have for reality? The next important juncture for her is the tragic death of Hae Jun, which she blamed herself for. As a result of this, she could no longer stomach playing the role of a hero on screen, for how could a sinner do something like that? It led to a sickening feeling inside of her, and during this phase, she went on her crusade as the Night Pacer, the vigilante, brutally taking down criminals as though in a desperate attempt to continue being the hero taking down criminals. But not long after, she realized that the sickening feeling was out of disgust in herself, and so she took up the final role of her life, or at least so she had planned, the role of the villain killed by the hero in the climax. There is one other meaningful aspect to her, which is as an actor, tying into the way 2.5 uses the lens of movies to tie into the themes and narrative. Noi's role in the main event story is as a supporting character who is also the protagonist of the story, helping Liang Yue along her character arc while adding to the pathos of the conflict with Shizeng and making it more personal. The majority of her own character arc is in her character story, where we see her evolution from the cold, uncompromising director who refused to empathize and took everything she had for granted, to whom she is in the main event story, a more open minded person who puts effort into empathizing with others, a self reflective person who understands how to ease the tension and avoid confrontation, with an unwavering smile on her face that hid the shadows underneath, who didn't take those around her and her own body for granted, even choosing to lose her own legs as a permanent reminder never to stray from this path. And of course, as a director, she also ties into the way 2.5 uses the lens of movies and incorporates the film industry to make its points. The above three form the core of the story, but 2.5 also has a rich side cast, most of whom I'll discuss. First, we have Loggerhead, the 5-star character of the patch, who effectively has 3 points of relevance. First is in her relationship with Scott, her friend and co-worker at the ACD, where neither is able to truly understand the other, and this understanding of one another, or well, in this case, lack thereof, is one of the key themes in this patch. Secondly, there are her memory issues, which tie into the concept of the self that this game is very interested in generally, with 2.5 being one of the stories where it's a point of emphasis. And lastly, there is a connection to the cinema framing, for she herself is an awakened Latham loop, which is a component of a film projector. She is a living witness to the film industry over the years, who records the countless stories across eras that are wiped out by the storm. Ananli is admittedly not as strongly linked to the central themes here as the others, but she is still relevant in several key ways. Her anecdote definitely connects in important ways to the theme of understanding of the self and of others, which is of course relevant here. She also ties into the narrative through the significance of ghosts and spirits in 2.5. Next, we have Poitier, who is, of course, Liang Yue's partner in the story for her to bounce off of and interact with. So, in that sense, she's, of course, important. 2.5 takes cues from buddy cop movies, so this ties into that as well. But the part I'd like to highlight is this moment.
Asshole.
Officer Poitier, what are you doing?
What? I'm teaching this douchebag a lesson.
This is a bold scene, especially since it's done for a character who is generally supposed to be likable. whom we are supposed to care about when she gets severely injured later on in the story. It is a grounding scene and a clear nod to police brutality. It is a brave choice, but the best one in service of the themes, narrative, and the characters, and shows how 2.5 is willing to do more than just the standard fare. Lynn is probably the most underrated character in 2.5 as a result of nearly the entirety of her characterization and development being in Noir's character story. The content for a ship with Noir, which I swear is a goated ship, is also entirely inside story. Now, on the surface, the relationship here and the character story itself can be summarized as Noir grows as a person as she learns from her mistakes in the past, and Lynn accompanies her throughout this journey. But this sort of summary loses all the wonderful flavor in it. It ignores the nuances in the dynamic, like Noy's Stepford Smiler act, which Lynn picks up on, that hides her true feelings, plus Noy's attempts at causing reactions in others, particularly Lynn, to observe to observe them, which leads to Lynn struggling to discern her true feelings and also figure out Noy's somewhat flirty attitude. No, I'm not delusional. And of course, Lynn herself, who clearly did not care for Noir as a person in the past due to her being a terrible boss back then, yet stuck around the entire time loyally. Lynn, who pretends like she doesn't care about Noir's success or failure, yet does everything she can to help her succeed, selling off her own clothes and even accompanying her to LA, taking satisfaction in Noir's dependence on her. Lynn, who despite her snark, shows an almost reverent attitude towards Noir's work. There are layers to their dynamic, forming arguably the richest and most mature relationship in the game, and might just be my favorite ship in the game. But well, let's move on to the next topic, the teams. The core theme of this patch is individuality and self, which it looks at through the lens of people playing roles in their lives. In order to truly understand yourself and others, you need to look past these roles to see and understand the true self. It intertwines this theme with the theme of justice and what it means by showing that justice is always colored by personal biases and that in order to have true justice, you need to have the aforementioned ability to see through the roles, to understand and empathize with others, even the so called villains. As an extension of this, there is also the case of understanding oneself. As to do so, one needs to be self aware of one's biases and flaws and have the self reflection to look deeper. The first theme is relevant to and connects to every uh, aspect of the patch and is the overarching theme, and the second is the more personal theme that is linked to Liang Yue and Shi Xing with a strong helping from Poitier as well. As I said, the first main theme pervades the entire patch, and the best way to understand this is to see how various characters struggle to understand one another. Shi Xing and Noir failed to understand each other and Herijun in the past. Liang Yue failed to fully understand her family and also failed to understand Shang Liang until her character story. Noir and Lin failed to understand each other for a while, but slowly were able to do so, and in the process also grew to become like each other, and then they married and kissed. Well, okay, the last part isn't explicitly shown, but we believe. Moving on, Poitier and Liang Yue struggled to understand each other at the start, though admittedly more so from Poitier's end, but they eventually grow to do so over the course of the story. Scott and Loggerhead failed to understand each other, and then Lee and Shen failed to understand each other in the former's anecdote, and of course, Liang Yue managing to understand Shi Xing is the crux of the finale of the main event story, where she finally manages to see past the role Shi Xing was playing, realizing that at her core she was a self-loathing individual who saw herself as a villain who deserved to die. More on this in a bit. There's also the second half of this theme, which is understanding of one's own self, which several showcase characters struggle with, and this is showcased, but it's most prominent with Liang Yue and Shi Xing, and we'll discuss this part alongside the second theme as they're linked nicely. Now, for the theme of justice, Liang Yue starts off as someone who had a clear black and white view of justice and did not fully acknowledge or understand her own biases, nor did she truly have the ability to see through the roles played by others. First, it's set up by Poitier's attack on the scam artist in the bank. This scene has two purposes. Not only does it show an example of someone who is generally shown to be a good person, clearly violating professional ethics out of a biased personal sense of justice, it also shows Liang stepping in, which puts us in her position of feeling like she doesn't have said biases. And then we have the scene where Loggerhead is asking Scott why she done it, which Liang herself states she didn't understand because of her black and white view. Evil doesn't need to be understood, it just needs to be stopped. However, this view itself is incorrect, as understanding is necessary to carry out true justice. And this is something Liang is forced to confront through Shixing, as she herself asks the question that she dismissed earlier.
Why are you doing this?
And through this moment, she is forced to acknowledge her biases, to acknowledge that her own sense of justice had flaws, which causes her mindset to waver. It is only after this she begins to take steps towards true justice by seeking to understand Xi Jing, the idol whom she'd previously only seen through the lens of her being her hero, the actress who played Detective CO7 and inspired her down her path. Shi Jing, for her part, wasn't able to immediately realize that the source of the sickening feeling inside her was her own self-loathing, her disgust at herself, resulting from her guilt and pain at Harry June's death. However, after a while, she is eventually able to arrive at this realization, but she's not able to realize this self-assessment itself was a result of her own flawed view of justice itself, of her own inner biases, that Herijun didn't blame her, that it wasn't her fault, that she was being too harsh on herself. This was a result of the worldview formed by a background I talked about before, from having lived her life as the child of a criminal, having to fend off and hide from her father's acquaintances and bouncing between jobs while fighting from her black and white sense of justice, her view that sin cannot be forgiven. The third part of the justice theme is well quite clear, whose relevance I've already talked about and highlighted. So let's move on to discuss the narrative. The brilliance of 2.5's narrative lies in the way it's layered in three parts. Layer 1 is the surface level plot. This is Liang Yu and her character growth, the conflict around the cursed film reel, the Dusho parade, and all of that. This is the core of the story, the main draw. The next layer is best described as the game of cat and mouse between Black Ibis and Beryl. Beryl orchestrated the theft of the items from the ACD by using Scott to have the theft be carried out, then erasing her memories of it. Black Ibis, in response, carried out a bold gambit by sending Scott out as bait while loosening her strings, turning her from someone used by Beryl to a wild card that forced Beryl to act in a more open manner, drawing out the mastermind from the shadows. The final layer is not exactly a layer and is more about the placement of 2.5 in the larger context of the overarching narrative of the game. 2.5 is a part of the Boney storyline told across 1.3, 2.0, 2.5, 3.2, and Matilda's anecdote. It introduces the Vigil's Bureau and gives them a long-term role, not just through the arcane item theft storyline, but also in a more subtle way by introducing threats, albeit merely in Black Ibis's overture. It expands on the setting in several ways that I'll detail later on. There are also a few things 2.5 which, well, minor spoilers for future content, you'll see referenced in, say, 3.5 as an example. What makes this setup clever is how it works for every level of narrative knowledge. I could show the 2.5 story to someone who's pretty much completely new to the game, and he'll understand the entirety of the first layer, the core of the story, plus most things from the second layer, and only barring a handful of references, cameos, and story tie-ins, they will completely get it and completely enjoy it. I can show someone who is fairly familiar with the game's narrative, the story, and they'd enjoy it while picking up on the references and, the Leonardo DiCaprio pointing meme, if you would like. And those who enjoy digging into every story in the game and all the intricate details of the overarching narrative will also enjoy it, for there is plenty there as well. Now, on to the next section, the atmosphere, or if you prefer, the vibe of 2.5 is something special. I think this is best illustrated in the two EPs released in 2.5, Rock Solid and The Truth Will Come. These two are very different pieces of music, yet have a similar core and are both equally representative of 2.5, which goes to show just how richly textured it is. It does not restrict itself by genre. Before I go further on this, I want to bring up the framing of the whole 2.5 story. R1999 often uses specific references to angle their stories. In 1.5, it's based on ancient Greek culture with an Escher-esque styling. In 1.7, it's the opera. In 2.6, it's Latin American literature. In 2.7, it's space exploration. Here, it is cinema. And this fact pervades the atmosphere of the entire story. It feels like you're watching a movie with a lot of effort put into delivering the feeling of cinema. Now back to what I was saying before. 2.5 is a story that has action, comedy, mystery, drama, tragedy, and even slice of life sequences. It arguably even has horror with Ananli's anecdote and designs for several enemies in the main event, particularly the boss, which I love. The R1999 writers generally don't limit themselves by genre or tone, and 2.5 is a particularly great showcase of this fact. And now we come to the final topic, the setting. 2.5 is clever about its handling of this, in that it's fully consistent with the basic aspect of the world while also not requiring much knowledge. On top of this, it expands the world even further, like establishing that werewolves not only exist, but are a common enough problem to not be seen as a big deal. It shows critters as pets and references Miss Babel as a part of this. It introduces a new Foundation subgroup through the Vigils Bureau who are basically like the Foundation FBI. It does things like give Unknown Lee a 1.0 character fairly significant screen time as well as an anecdote of her own, while with said anecdote also having cameos from past characters like Horrorpedia and Marcus, plus references and mentions of stuff like the 1.5 Uluru games, as well as Space City, the latter of which we learn is a time bubble, whatever the fuck that means. All in all, 2.5 does a great job of making the world feel expansive, evolving, lived in, yet familiar, all at the same time. That's all for this video. Thank you for your time. This is my longest analysis video yet, which is kind of scary, but this is going to be a rare case of such. I hope you all enjoyed it.